will forever be a legend here at Tottenham. It's a massive club. Everything I do is for the long term.
And still Ricky Villa. What a fantastic run. He scored.
Gascoigne going to have a crack. He is, you know. Oh, he's there.
Here's Lucas Moura. Oh, they done it. The wait for silverware is over.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of the Tottenham Way podcast. The international break is over. Lots of stories, and we will touch on a couple involving Spurs players. But of course, our focus is on Sunday afternoon, the North London derby, 4:30 kickoff for Arsenal against Spurs. I'm Marcus Buckland. Delighted to have the two Toms with me after a busy few days covering various international teams. Tom Allnutt of the Times and Tom Barclay of the Sun. And guys, I guess we should just cover quickly a couple of issues of relevance to Spurs in terms of what's been happening around the world, and then focus on the big game. And I want to start with a positive because Brennan Johnson, Tom Barclay, has done what Brennan Johnson does best and scored a very good goal for Wales. Does that mean he should start on Sunday?
Good question, Marcus. I mean, you say it's what he does best. I don't think he often scores goals like this. I mean, for anyone who hasn't seen it, he sort of cuts in off the left, which is interesting. Whereas opposed to he often plays on the right, although I guess Frank has played him off the left at the start of the season. Dribbles inside, and what a finish. I mean, we're used to him having those sort of back post tap-ins, particularly under Ange, and he was prolific at them and very good at them. But this was a slightly different goal. Really, really good finish. And yeah, I mean, the debate was already kind of raging, I suppose, ahead of the international break, particularly with Kudus being injured, of getting Johnson back into the team, because for all his perceived faults from a lot of the Spurs fan base, he does score goals or he makes things happen. He seems to get chances. And with Spurs at times, particularly at home, in recent weeks, looking a little bit toothless up front, get Johnson in the team and hopefully he'll make things happen. Now, we're still waiting to find out, aren't we, about Kudus' injury status. But I think, you know, based on particularly for that goal against Wales and the sort of situation I just alluded to, there's definitely a conversation to be had over, even if Kudus is fit, do you get Johnson in the team? Do you play both of them against Arsenal? Definitely.
Well, if George was here, he'd be saying play him because George has got a soft spot for Brennan Johnson. And Tom, I'll tell you one thing about him, because there was a lot of narrative before this international break. Oh, you know, what's happened to Johnson, leading goal scorer last season, can't get in the Spurs team, not even making it into the Wales starting 11. But he shows a bit of resilience by scoring that goal. I'm liking to think that there's still a lot more to come from him. And, you know, when better to show that perhaps than at Arsenal at the weekend.
Yeah, hi Marcus. I agree. I mean, I think Johnson, you know, he has put up with a lot of stick in his time at Spurs, and I think he has shown that kind of ability to bounce back 2 or 3 times from periods of poor form. I mean, I think he seems to be, in my opinion, quite a streaky player, that kind of a confidence player, that when he's sort of on it and he's feeling in rhythm and yeah, I mean, when his morale is up, I think, you know, he is a really valuable player in the team, not just with his goals, but I think also with the kind of width he brings, the ability to kind of beat people. But when he's not on it, and when his confidence is low and the fans are sort of on him, you know, then we see sometimes performances are really underwhelming. I mean, he scored in that big win over Copenhagen, didn't he? Got sent off as well. But now another really good goal against Wales. I wonder if, you know, Frank might look at it and just think maybe there's a bit of momentum here, you know, that actually this could be the sort of lively, more confident Johnson that, to be honest, Tottenham really need at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe this is going to be a springboard for him. Now, a former Spurs player who went goal crazy over the past week was Troy Parrott. 5 in 2 games. Should we be re-signing him imminently, Tom B?
Well, I mean, it has crossed my mind whether Troy Parrott might be someone Spurs might reconsider, because he's still very young. I mean, this is a player, if you remember, was coming through the ranks at Spurs, and immediately comparisons to Harry Kane came along, which no player can live up to be fair. But it didn't quite happen, and he moved to Holland. But he's been pretty prolific since he's gone to Holland. Obviously, he played against Spurs last season for AZ Alkmaar. Particularly notably in the knockouts, which Spurs managed to get through in the second leg where they were too strong and Odegaard had his big moment with 2 goals. But the first leg, Spurs were arguably lucky not to be out of it completely. I mean, Alkmaar ran them ragged. Eventually, it was just 1-0. But I thought Parrott was very good in that game. He caused a lot of problems for Spurs' defence, which, if I remember rightly, I don't think Romero or Van der Ven were playing in that game. They might have been on the bench. But still, he was physical. He was a nuisance throughout and really caused problems. And like I say, he's been scoring prolifically, not quite to the levels that we've seen over the international break, with 5 goals in 2 games. Unbelievable story for him, being the hero. And when you consider Spurs' options at the moment up front, I'm not saying necessarily they should sign him or re-sign him unless there was a good deal to be had, albeit he would help with the homegrown issue, I suppose. Because I imagine most fans have got their sort of sights set on someone with a bit more caliber than him. But if he were there right now, there is a case to be said that you might start him right now, because Richarlison's is blown probably more cold than hot so far this season. Dominic Solanke was still waiting. Is he even going to be back before the end of the year? Matisse Tell actually did well off the bench against United, obviously scored the goal, but I don't think people are quite convinced yet, at least. Interesting to see he's been linked in the Italian press today with a potential loan move to Roma, so that's one to watch. And who am I missing? There's one more forward. Oh, Kolo Muani. And the reason I'm missing him is he's now injured, isn't he, with his broken jaw. So I think that's more where I'm at. If he was at the club now, he'd be definitely in with a chance of starting. But I don't know whether you would be looking to re-sign him come January or not.
To be honest, Tom, if you were at the club now, there'd be a great chance that you'd be starting on Sunday. That's the situation that we have got to. Well, maybe that's a slight exaggeration.
Tom has.
I've heard about it. It's amazing how many Spurs players go somewhere else and start to be brilliant, whether it's a permanent move or they go on loan. And here's another example, Tom, Jamie Donnelly, who's currently at Stoke and by all accounts has been looking the bee's knees for Northern Ireland during the international break.
Yeah, I mean, I interviewed Jamie Donnelly last season when he was at Leyton Orient before that brilliant goal against Man City in the FA Cup, and I really liked him. He's a really good personality, really good character, and he sort of felt like he was one of those players whose sort of character and personality reflected his kind of play. He's quite sort of, I don't know, just fun and like heart on his sleeve and honest, and I really took to him actually, and I'm glad to see he's doing well. I know that he was quite disappointed. In fact, this was the beginning of last season, when Spurs sort of sent him out on loan, and he was playing left back, wasn't he, in pre-season under Ange, a couple of times I think, when actually he's sort of basically a number 10. I mean, I think always with all these players, it's the same with Parrott, isn't it, that you talk there, Marcus, about players going off and doing well at other clubs, and I think that's a reflection of just what the Premier League is, and how hard it is to be a success at a club like Spurs in the kind of top 6 of the Premier League. I mean, Troy Parrott can be a really good striker, in the Dutch league or whatever, I mean, slightly sort of Vincent Janssen vibes, right? Like, who scored sort of 30 goals in 30 games for AZ Alkmaar, came to Spurs and, to be honest, could hardly get a single goal, and that is the thing. And it's obviously the challenge for scouts to kind of work out who can scale up, and but still, I mean, brilliant for Troy Parrott. I mean, what a story that was at the international break. It was fantastic. See, I think a lot of people have said this, haven't they? That, we always talk about the international break sort of being an interruption of the Premier League and how people are sort of, down on it all the time. But I think this international break particularly has been just fantastic. At the end of the qualifying campaign, there are just stories everywhere about countries and players just coming to life, and it's been really refreshing, I've got to say.
Just on Troy Parrott, I suppose it wasn't surprising to see stories very quickly after those heroics for Ireland of a talk of a possible move back to the Premier League. And I do wonder if trying to think the sort of level of club, maybe a West Ham, someone like that who could do with a striker. If he were to move and be an absolute hit, how frustrated Spurs fans would be if that were the case. But I think overall, I do think perhaps Spurs potentially should be looking at a higher level. And just on Donnelly, I think it was Luton in pre-season, maybe Reading as well, that he was given a bit of a chance, maybe even at sort of number 10. I know Mikey Moore played in one of those games at number 10, but he was given a bit of a chance by Frank, and he just didn't quite seize it. I mean, Spurs really didn't look very cohesive in those games from an attacking perspective. I mean, you could argue there have been games in the actual season with the sort of multi-million-pound signings playing where they haven't looked that cohesive going forward, but particularly in the Luton game, which was a really drab 0-0. And I wonder if that was maybe his chance to really stake a claim. And after that, he was then sent out on loan. But there seems to be has been a lot of excitement about him within the academy for years now. It's just whether it feels like maybe make or break this season, whether he's ever going to sort of make it at Tottenham if he has a good season at Stoke and then comes back, and then next summer, I suppose.
Yeah, well, he's got to look at Harry Kane and just remember you can have 2 or 3, 4 low moves, and if you're patient, suddenly your chance may come. So we'll watch his progress with interest. And actually, talking about the international break, I mean, obviously we all saw what Scotland did on Tuesday night. I mean, and Spurs have had some great Scottish players through the decades, and I know there is a massive rivalry, of course there is, between England and Scotland, but I'm personally delighted that they're going to be part of this extraordinary party of 48 countries at the World Cup. So well done to Scotland. Of course, England have been perfect in terms of their results. Sir Harry scores a couple more. The interesting thing, and this is a Spurs podcast, not an England one, so I'm not going to get into Jude Bellingham's situation, but Tuchel had a couple of things to say about Jed Spence, indirectly or directly. You were there, Tom, the whole incident involving Spence and Van de Ven after the Chelsea game, the snub of Thomas Frank. What did you read into what the England manager had to say about that?
Yeah, it was quite interesting, actually. This wasn't part of a press conference. It was part of a sort of written paper briefing ahead of the press conference, ahead of the game. So this would have been Saturday. And we were working out what we were going to ask. And the main line was about don't do a Ronaldo and get sent off and risk being banned for the opening games. But there was one final question that came in about the Spence situation. And I was quite surprised by his answer, actually, Tuchel. He said he didn't like it. I have to paraphrase because I can't remember the exact quote, but he was essentially, he wasn't too impressed by what he perceived to be a bit of a snub towards the manager. Now, Frank, I think, has dealt with that situation pretty masterfully, really, because it was a big news story. Players blank the manager. The image of Frank looking back at them for several seconds really was quite a moment where you felt, wow, this could be perceived and was being perceived as a real show of disrespect, I suppose, to his manager. But Frank sort of calmed it right down. The next press conference, he said both players came in of their own accord separately to apologise, and there's not going to be any kind of consequences, and it was mainly due to frustration with the performance, the results, and the reaction of the fans, effectively booing them during the game, and that was it. But it's interesting hearing from, I spoke to one former player this week I'm going to do an interview with, so I won't say who it is, but he felt like it was a bit of a mugging off, was the phrase he used towards the manager. And then Tuchel also kind of hinting the same thing, so my ears pricked up when he said that. It was definitely a sort of interesting point, as was the fact that Spence, don't think, got on the pitch for either of the England games, if I remember rightly, in this recent international break against Serbia or Albania. And suddenly you're looking at Spence's situation with regards to the World Cup squad. Left back seems to be the position that is wide open and ready for someone to come in and take that position, because I think in the last 17 games or 18 games now, there have been 10 different left backs. But Nico O'Reilly, despite only just making his debut against Serbia, playing obviously for City under Pep, already looks like has a good chance of it. Tino Livramento, I think, is probably going to be the starter if he comes back and shows the same form of fitness. So suddenly, having been in the last few camps and done well, not getting a game time here, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I'm now wondering about his prospects and whether Tuchel's comments suggest that might have counted against him. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that would be a bit harsh, Tom. We know that in days gone by, there were, I think it's fair to say, question marks about Jed Spence and his attitude, etc., etc. But I mean, the way he's performed since he's established himself at Spurs has been so exciting, either on the left or the right. I hope that one incident, which, as Tom B said, was I thought dealt with very well by Thomas Frank, doesn't come back to bite him. That would be a bit harsh, don't you think?
I think as well that Tuchel's slightly overstepping there, and he does do this. He's great for journalists because he gives opinions on almost everything. But with respect, what does he know about it? Like, he wasn't there. He wasn't in the dressing room. He doesn't know the Van der Ven and Spence Van der Ven at all, and Spence particularly well. I very much doubt he's spoken to Frank about it, although I don't know that. I mean, I very much take the players' version in this case, which is that they were annoyed about A, the result, and B, the fans booing, and that has been what Van der Ven has said pretty openly. And, it's what his entourage also say very clearly, that was what it was about, that it wasn't a mugging off of Thomas Frank. And Frank has also accepted that version of events as well, by the way. So I don't know. I was slightly sort of surprised, and I don't know. I wasn't overly impressed with Tuchel, to be honest, sort of stepping into the kind of Tottenham zone there and sort of opining on what he felt was what was the issue. I mean, if he has an issue with Spence's attitude because he's seen something in training in England, then completely fair enough. But it seems to me like he was, making an interpretation from a very long distance away.
Funny enough, I think he actually was there. I think he was at the game as a fan, as an observer.
Wait, you're still far away, even if you're in the stands. You're not in the dressing room, right? Like, I mean, he didn't know what happened.
No, true.
Keep out of it, please.
Just to read the quote, he said, I didn't like it because the players know they are not only national players when they are the 10 days in camp, they are always national players, and the standard of behaviour is always important. I mean, you can only go on what he says, and the fact that he didn't play in these couple of games, again, maybe reading too much into it. But look, before any of this, Spence knew that he had a real sort of challenge on his hands, and the fact that he's even in the contention for going to a World Cup. Once again, with Jed Spence, we must have a reflection on how far he's come. It's amazing, isn't it? I'm supposed to throw it forward. Maybe you're going to do this later on, maybe in the pod when we really get into team lineups. But that whole, do you play Destiny? Do you play Spence? Do you play Spence? Do you play Porro? Is decisions that Frank's got.
Yeah. We'll definitely come on to that in the second half of the pod. I think I'm right in saying that was Tuchel not involved in a similar sort of snubbing incident when he was the manager of PSG with Mbappe when he subbed him. I may be getting this slightly wrong, but I'm assuming that's perhaps why he sort of got embroiled in that particular conversation, because as a club manager himself, he knows what it's like when one of your star players disses you a bit. But I think Tom A's right, really leave that alone to Thomas Frank. And actually, one other thing I want to ask you both in this part of the pod is the Tottenham manager's new book. And I saw a little extract from it the other day where, incredibly, he had job interviews at Chelsea and Manchester United on the same day. And obviously, he didn't get either job, but he was writing, saying, "Oh, look at me, little Thomas from wherever I come from. This is unbelievable." And obviously, I'm looking forward to reading the book. I don't know, Tom, if you've had a little glimpse of it. It won't be as good as Tom B's Miracle in Bilbao, that is for sure. But I wonder how revealing that's going to be.
Yeah, I imagine the Spurs communications department are slightly sort of wriggling nervously in their seats. But I'm sure, Frank being Frank, I think it will be fairly sort of diplomatic. I'm sure. Yeah, it was interesting, wasn't it, the Man United, and how do you prepare for two interviews in the same day? Or I guess with Chelsea and Man United, you sort of have similar questions, how do you handle huge club, massive expectations, difficult sort of directors, all sorts of, maybe just sort of go and say the same answers and see if they kind of come out well. I remember someone, I don't think it was Frank, there was a manager who did an interview at United in the last few years, and I remember being told that they basically had to do about 4 or 5 interviews before they even got to speak to sort of Ratcliffe, and that was the kind of like the bureaucracy of the whole thing, that they were very unimpressed with the way that they had to sort of go through so many loopholes just to kind of get to the kind of top dog, basically. So maybe Frank had more than one interview at Man United and it kind of kept going. But I mean, it's a reminder as well, isn't it, that Frank, during this period was being looked at by all the big clubs, and as much as there may have been a reason why Chelsea didn't go from him, I think he was in the final 2, if I'm not mistaken, at Chelsea. I think it was him and Maresca. Or is this when they were appointing Poch? No, I think it was with the Maresca. So he was right there. I think with United, slightly less so, I have to say. But yeah, we look forward to the book. I mean, I guess we're sort of reminded of kind of Poch's book and how it slightly destabilised a few things, has to be said, around that time. I don't think it was the wisest thing looking back on it. but it was a fascinating read. Frank's, I think, will be a slightly lighter touch, I imagine.
Well, let us hope that he doesn't have to go for any more job interviews in the next few years, because obviously the pressure has built just a little bit. We'll take a quick break, and when we come back, let us get in to the heart of the matter, a visit to Arsenal on Sunday afternoon. Well, guys, we know how well Arsenal are playing. We know that Tottenham's away form is encouraging. So I don't know how to anticipate what might happen, what might unfold on Sunday afternoon. Shall we start with an issue for the Gunners? One issue in particular, the injury to Gabriel. And I'm not sure where Calafiori stands in terms of fitness levels as well. I'm just wondering, Tom A, is this maybe, although we've got injury problems as well, is this maybe quite a good time to play the league leaders immediately after an international break?
Yes, I think so. I always think after the international break, results are a little bit topsy-turvy, that some slightly random things happen after international breaks. It's never a good time to put together an accumulator, because you always get sort of a few surprises. I think various reasons for that. Players are coming from a long way, so some are kind of coming from different time zones. Also, bottom line, the coaches have much less time to prepare for the match. They often only have 1 or 2 days, and not even necessarily on the training pitch, which I think will, to be honest, bother both coaches, knowing how much Frank and Arteta really do prepare for opponents. I think both managers will feel slightly nervous and underprepared for this game, I think, and maybe that's what Tottenham want. They want a bit of chaos, I think, in this match, because ultimately, if you take Arsenal at their best versus Tottenham at their best, then Arsenal win this game, I'm afraid. So they want there to be some randomness in this match. So I agree. I think it's post-international break. I think it's a good time. And I think Gabriel's injury is interesting, because I honestly think he's probably been Arsenal's best player. I mean, we did some predictions about a couple of weeks ago in the Times, and I sort of said that Gabriel, for me, is probably the favourite to win player of the season right now, because if Arsenal win the league, he's probably going to score about 10 goals from corners, and Arsenal are going to have the best defence that's ever been seen in the Premier League, et cetera, et cetera. He's right there. So to take him out of the team is a destabilising, factor, definitely. And if we think that Arsenal may or may not have a wobble at some point, I think Gabriel stepping out is one of those things you might think, that could be a catalyst for something like that happening. The other side of it is, I have to say, I've read a couple of things this morning about what Arsenal might do, and there are 3 or 4 options, and they all look like good ones. They can play Hincapié in at left centre back, who's, to be honest, one of the best left centre halves around in Europe. They could push Calafiori into centre half and bring in Lewis Skelly at left back, who was probably one of the best left backs in the league last season. They could maybe sort of push Timber into centre half and play, I think, maybe Ben White at right back. They've got really good options, and that is the difference with Arsenal, unfortunately, from the Spurs' point of view this season, is that we're
Tom, thank you so much for quashing all the optimism I was trying to fill myself with ahead of the game.
Sorry. Well, the first half of the answer, you could take that and, glass half full. But, there was a time, wasn't there, where one of these injuries would really rock Arsenal. I think they do have good options. But I do think Gabriel carries a certain kind of John Terry, Vidic-esque kind of influence in that team that you can't quite put your finger on. He is the leader. He is the kind of powerhouse. So, I think Spurs will feel that this is a decent time to play Arsenal, even though Arsenal are clearly on a great run.
I mean, I'm glad, that we won't have to worry about his lurking presence when they have a set piece, a corner or whatever, because he's so dangerous from those. I also feel, obviously, still, Tom B, that set pieces are going to be critical. Obviously, Spurs need to be at their best, and they've really made strides in that area. But we know how dangerous Arsenal can be, and the focus, I'm sure, will be on Vicario again. There were questions asked about him following Manchester United's late equaliser from the corner a couple of weeks ago. How confident are you that Spurs will be able to deal with the very precise threats that are going to rain in on Vicario's goal?
More confident than I was last season. That's, I think, one of the things that's gone slightly under the radar at Spurs during Thomas Frank is how much sort of more secure Vicario has generally looked. Generally, I know you mentioned the Man United one, but from being like such a hot issue throughout Ange's time, for sort of 3/4 of Ange's time, Vicario, how shaky he is, how can they sort it out? Frank has quietly set about improving that. I don't know whether that's to do with I'm not sort of tactically, aware enough to notice if it's been Vicario's positioning or the way the whole thing is set up. It's probably a combination of all of it, but generally that's been less of an issue. But let's be honest, they're playing the best of the best when it comes to this, who always seem to find a way. And so often, it's a ball sort of fired to the back post and a player gets free. And every time you're like, how is this happening? But Spurs themselves have made hay with that. Think of how Bentancur, shouldered it back across for Van der Ven against Everton, or I think it was who scored the goal against West Ham where Xavi Simons sort of floated it to the back post. It seems to be a regular thing in football now.
Sarr, I think, wasn't it?
Was it Sarr? Yeah, maybe. But you mentioned Ben White.
Oh, he scored at Everton.
Yeah, you mentioned Ben White there potentially, because Kieran Timber actually seemed to go down injured for Holland the other day, and it still remains to be seen whether he'll be fit. And the same goes for Calafiori, who missed Italy. So suddenly, 3 of their starting back 4 are at least in doubt at the moment. But that, as Tom pointed out, I didn't even mention Mosquera, who I think would be the most likely centre back to come in actually, who's been very good when he's played. But Ben White and the mention of him made me think of the dark arts that he sort of put into play against Vicario during Ange's time, where he sort of was messing with his gloves and all that kind of thing. So Arsenal are really savvy when it comes to this kind of thing, and Spurs really need to be on their game. But like I say, more confidence than they've been before. The other thing to mention about injuries is it looks like Gyökeres won't be playing as well for Arsenal. I think Sweden manager, I think they were suggesting, I guess it's Graham Potter now, isn't it? He obviously missed out against in the week. Sorry, Isak didn't play either. So if he's missing as well, it's probably going to be Mourinho up top, even though he's done really well. He's still a makeshift striker. So I agree with Tom, not just only after the international break, but just given the fitness state that Arsenal are in, this feels like the best time to play a team that's been pretty relentless. And it is quite interesting also, just a final point, speaking to some of these sort of England people, the feeling is that Arsenal are the sort of best team around at the moment within the sort of FA hierarchy in the way they play. So it's going to be a challenge to whoever they put out.
It is worth saying, maybe, I'm just looking at the stats here, Tottenham are the best defence in the league at set pieces this season, which I didn't actually realise. I knew they were good. I thought they'd be in the sort of top quarter, but they've only conceded 2 goals this season from set pieces, which is joint best with Sunderland, actually, strangely. Arsenal have only conceded 3, so they're pretty good. But when we're talking about Vicario and we're talking about the Ange team, obviously, where we got used to them being so rickety from corners, particularly, that is impressive. If you that's the positive, Marcus. The negative, I'm afraid, is that Arsenal are by far the best team at scoring goals from set pieces. So they've scored 12 goals this season from set pieces already, which is 3 more than Chelsea, who are second. And Spurs, again, even in scoring terms, they've scored 6, which is joint 5th. So it's half as many as Arsenal, but they're still up there. Spurs are no longer I think we maybe have this kind of ingrained from the last 2 or 3 years. And even, to be honest, historically, I don't think Tottenham have ever been a particularly good set piece team. But this season, they're a good side when it comes to set pieces. And maybe we shouldn't be quite as nervous as we think. And as you said, I think Gabriel is a really key weapon in that.
Yeah, those are great stats. Actually, it makes us conceding that corner, or the goal from the corner against Manchester United, all the more painful. The one other thing I would say in terms of players that might be missing for Arsenal, I can remember having similar conversations in the past. Was it last season when they were without Rice and somebody else, and we're all thinking, oh, this is a great time to be playing Arsenal. We shouldn't really worry about them, should we? We need to focus on our starting 11. And we touched on Brennan Johnson, but Tom B, what sort of team is Frank going to pick for this particular challenge, do you think?
Well, that's a hard one. I think actually I think George's sort of relatively consistent critiques of Frank is he often feels like he picks the wrong team for each particular game. The team where you expect, Paulinho and Bentancur to play, they don't. And then the games where you wouldn't want them playing, where you want to be a bit more progressive, They do. And so he's a bit harder to second guess. I think there's clearly he sees things differently than your average fan. I mean, obviously, as a manager, he's way more. There's a lot more going on there, but I just think it makes it slightly harder to call when it comes to that. I mean, we talked a lot about Frank being a bit pragmatic or very pragmatic at times. I don't think this is one of the games where Spurs fans are going to be complaining if they go that way. If anything, that's probably the sort of best route to success against this Arsenal team. So you would expect the two of them, Paulinho and Bentancur, to be in the middle. I think I'd like to see a doggy at left back, just generally. And I feel like it's harsh on Spence because he's such a good player, but maybe he has to challenge Porro. But on the right side now, because he just offers so much balance, and he's just very good. I find him good defensively as well as going forward. So I like to see him there. But yeah, I don't know. There are quite a lot of question marks, and it's hard to second guess Thomas Frank, I think.
It really is.
I was just going to say, Mark, it's difficult, isn't it, left back? Because Spence, I think it kind of crystallises that dilemma that Frank has, I think, because I think Udogie is the best bet going forward, the best bet creatively for Tottenham. But who do you want up against Saka 1v1? I would probably rather have Spence. I mean, it's a difficult one. And
he was very good, wasn't he, in pre-season against Saka on that point? So
exactly. So I wonder, I'm afraid, if Frank might look at that and think, I go for the guy who I will back to restrict Arsenal's best attacking player. Whereas I think, a lot of Tottenham fans will probably be hoping he'll go for Udogie. So that'll be a really interesting selection, I think.
Yeah. I mean, there are so many. I think I agree with you, Tom. I mean, I love Udogie, and he came on and he was brilliant against Manchester United, and he's got so much attacking flair. But I do think for this particular challenge and the Saka threat, I think I'd be more inclined to start with Spence. I really hope Porro has a good game because he looked tired. He was poor against Manchester United. Yeah, the double pivot you would expect to operate. We know, assuming that our two centre backs are fit, that answers its own question. I mean, up front, is this the sort of day when you want Richarlison to be causing all sorts of trouble and distractions and getting the crowd wound up and everything else? What's our best bet in that attacking third, guys?
I think so. But I mean, we've been pretty harsh on Richarlison in the last few weeks. And I think, probably deservedly so. I don't think he's been at his best. We should remember that I think, it wasn't long ago we were saying he had a really good start to the season. Again, a bit like Johnson, I think he's a very streaky player. I just think the options that Tottenham have now, and we assume that Solanke is definitely not available yet, certainly not to start. I would go with Richarlison just for the physicality. I think Arsenal is such a physical team. You look at the height they have, you look at the strength they have, they're so robust. Set pieces as well, clearly. I think all these things, I think I would go with Richarlison over Tell. What do you think, Tom?
Well, I mean, that's the only alternative, isn't it? I mean, others might have argued for Brennan Johnson playing up there, but he hasn't done it. So I can't see him suddenly doing it in, Spurs' biggest game of the season so far. I'm inclined to think Richarlison just because of experience, and when he's on his game, he's probably more effective. But let's be honest, there have been a lot of games recently where he's not been on his game. And Tell, to be fair, made the difference against Man United. So I don't think there are sort of right now great options for Frank to choose between. But given the impact that Tell made in the last game, I'm not saying this is what I think definitely should happen, but I don't know. I don't think Richardson's been playing well enough. So why not, to a certain extent? Why not give Tell a chance to start from the other?
I think I'd rather have Tom. I think I'd rather have the option of bringing Tell off the bench.
Yeah.
And he made the impact like Udogie against Manchester United. We all know that Richarlison has been so out of form recently. It's been a little bit embarrassing. But you know what? Needs must. And if I'm Thomas Frank, I'm saying to him, look, you're struggling. We know that, but we think you're a great player. Here is your big chance. Don't let the red mist descend, but go out there and show us why you are Brazil's centre forward. And let's see how he reacts. And we kind of got nothing to lose in that regard, I don't think, because not many people expect Spurs are going to get anything from Sunday.
Also,
one other factor to throw in the mix, maybe. Go on, Tom.
Well, I was just going to mention, you mentioned Johnson being quite a streaky goal scorer. I mean, Richarlison definitely is as well. And he did get that goal against Man United. So it feels like with him, he can be such a confidence player sometimes. Maybe that could make a difference to sort of argue for him. And actually, when you think of his attributes, when he's playing at his best, then maybe he's the most suited centre forward to the way Frank wants to play. But again, it comes back to what kind of Richarlison are you going to get?
Just one other factor is that Richarlison, I think, has gone with Brazil, but I don't think he's played either of the games. I think he was unused in both matches. But still, I mean, Brazil played. So we're recording here on Wednesday lunchtime. They played last night, Tuesday night. I don't think Tell has gone anywhere. I think he's been at the training ground. I don't think he's gone away with any of the sort of French under-21s or anything. I think he's presumably been working with the group and with Frank, the players that he has there. So I guess that's one thing you might put in Tell's favour, that Frank might think, we've been working with him for the last 10 days. Richarlison will probably be arriving, Thursday or something. And maybe you might think, okay, we've been able to kind of drill into Tell some of the pressing patterns, some of the set piece structures. I don't know. Just that might be something that might work in Tell's favour.
Well, I mean, as you said a bit earlier, it's so hard to predict what Thomas Frank is going to do. So we'll have to wait until the last minute. But I mean, the other thing that strikes me, and I agree with you, Tom B, that, yeah, this is the sort of game where we need to see the pragmatic Tottenham that Thomas Frank's been able to actually get working very well. But equally, if they go and play like that and are heavily beaten, there's all sorts of shades to this weekend, aren't there? Spurs go and play really well, push hard, lose, but walk off the pitch with their heads held high. Or they go and try and hang on and kind of look like they did against Chelsea the other week and are feeble. There's all sorts of possibilities. And then, of course, in the back of Frank's mind, he's got PSG away in the Champions League next week. So I've just got no idea what to expect. I mean, you're always starting with a degree of optimism. I do hope, though, that, because we have been good away from home. So I want Tottenham to at least go and play in the manner that's produced a lot of good results. And if they lose, let's lose going as tooth and nail as possible within the system that Frank adopts. I think that's quite important, isn't it, after the feeble surrender to Chelsea in particular?
Yeah, the sort of stink of that Chelsea game still sort of hangs over Spurs to a certain extent. It felt like a really significant performance to the whole Thomas Frank narrative, which at first, was going from mild to maybe mild frustration over not sort of imposing the team themselves more at home to that against one of your rivals. And that's what kind of changed the narrative. But having said that, after Man United, Frank was talking a lot about how much they limited Man United's chances. I still think probably always, but particularly at this stage of his Spurs tenure, he is a manager who is more focused than others on stopping the opposition than trying to make things happen. That's just his makeup. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it sometimes I think can lead to not being as sort of imposing as maybe some of the fans would like, particularly at home. There's obviously a different fixture completely, and it's about going at a different way against the best team in the league. But I still hope, kind of off the back of your question, that Xavi Simons starts at number 10. I think he's getting a nice head of steam. He's growing with confidence, and you've got to have some of the ball. You can't just concede possession the whole time.
Correct.
So have a sort of ball manipulator, someone a technician who can show what we hoped he would bring, and he didn't at all for the first sort of couple of months, but in the recent games has started to have that composure and that sort of not arrogance, but confidence on the ball that other players don't quite have in the team. I think it's important to have him there. Just one final thought on Tell versus Richarlison. I think a big criticism we had of Tell, criticism I meant in a sort of, he's very young and he's just not physically quite up to it yet. But there was a lot of, this guy doesn't look quite ready to play number 9 in the Premier League, if he ever will. I remember Dan Kilpatrick after the Ipswich game, which was a good win for Spurs, still going, I just can't sort of see it with him. But you would say the way he held off one of the strongest centre-backs in Matthijs de Ligt to score that goal against Man United, maybe that shows he's getting to grips with the physicality. And if he's not going to get in the team now when there's no other strikers apart from Richarlison who's not playing well, when is he, I suppose, is the question.
I think with Xavi, I agree with Tom. It's a really good point. It'll be interesting to see if he starts, and if so, where he starts, what his role is. I do think with Xavi, it's worth maybe just saying that it's easy maybe to think of a sort of a Dutch number 10, and you look at his kind of size and you kind of might think he's just sort of a creator, but actually through his career, he's really been hailed as a really good presser. He actually does work very hard off the ball, and I'm sure that's one of the reasons why Spurs, were persuaded to spend the money they did on him. So I think it wouldn't be accurate to say he's a sort of a risk in terms of the press, but clearly physically there's a thing there where if you're playing a midfield three with Xavi at the tip of that, and Arsenal are playing, Zubimendi, Rice, and whoever it is in that three, then there's a risk of getting overrun, I guess. I honestly think in terms of the wider approach, Tottenham have to do the thing here that gives them the best chance of winning the game. It's not about, and I sense with what you were saying there, Marcus, that, go out and sort of, if they play on the front foot and they sort of play with gusto and they lose 2-0, then maybe we'll be happy. I actually don't see that. Spurs are top of the league in terms of away form this season. They're a really good away team, and we've been over the home form, etc., and we can park that for another day. But in terms of going on the road, there's no better team in the league. And they've beaten Man City this season already away from home. They know how to do this. Frank is good at this. This is not a game, in my opinion, where Frank should go and play a sort of gung-ho side to kind of keep the fans happy. Go and do the thing that Arsenal don't want you to do, which is to sit in, be compact, play well on the break. Tom's absolutely right. You can't spend 90 minutes against Arsenal without the ball. You have to make the most of the ball when you've got it. But don't go out there and play Xavi and play, a sort of Ange-esque kind of side and be happy to sort of play in the Tottenham way. Because actually, the one thing that Arsenal don't like, and there aren't many things because Arsenal are a fantastic team. One thing they don't really like is they don't like teams sitting deep and saying to them, "Can you break us down?" Because what is Arsenal's weakness? Their weakness is actually creating chances. Like they're a really solid team who don't concede goals, and they'll hit you hard at set pieces. But when it comes to breaking down sides, that's what Arsenal get uncomfortable about. So do that. Make them feel uncomfortable. Don't play the way that Arsenal want you to play away at the Emirates.
No, let me make this clear. I totally concur with that. What I am saying is if Spurs go with that sensible approach, which I'm sure they will, and you're right, they should. But if it, goes wrong and you find yourself 2-0 down after 60 minutes, I don't want them to remain totally passive for the final 30 minutes and still lose 2-0. Then I'd rather see, let's see if we've got a bit of a plan B. I just don't want to just put our hands out and go, yeah, you're too good. That was the point I was trying to say. But absolutely, let's try and show the strengths that's got us good wins at Manchester City, at Leeds, at West Ham, at Everton. Yeah, absolutely right. But don't be completely passive if it starts to go wrong. That's the point I'm trying to get across.
Yeah, I guess there's just this, and completely rightly so, but there is this huge debate right now, isn't there, about whether Frank is ambitious enough, whether he's creative enough, whether Tottenham at home, particularly against lower sides, particularly, are creative and exciting enough. And I think all those debates are valid. I just think they have to be put to one side for this weekend. I honestly think you're going away to Arsenal, do the thing that gets you the best chance of getting a result.
Yeah, and for most of us, probably sit behind the sofa for most of the 90 minutes. Can I ask you both? I mean, obviously, we know that Thomas Frank has come in for some criticism. We were having that fascinating conversation a couple of weeks back about those who, if they're Ange fans, they're never quite going to buy into Frank, etc., etc. So there's a little bit of uncertainty. I go back to the start of Mikel Arteta's time at Arsenal. Now, he did win the FA Cup, didn't he, very early on, not really with his team. But then Arsenal went through a lot of difficult periods, and I mean, I'm not close to Arsenal, so I could be wrong, but I get the impression a lot of patience was shown towards him. And then last season, it started to bubble up a bit as they're getting closer and closer, but not crossing the line. Do you think we as Spurs fans and as a club need to have a look at the patience that was shown towards Arteta early in his reign, and then hopefully have more chance of benefiting from subsequent dividends? Tom B?
Well, when you say patience, are you talking about within the club or are you talking about the fans? Because I do
More
think
the fans trying to buy into this long-term vision that Thomas Frank, as he says at the start of our pod, everything I do is for the long term.
I mean, yes, I agree with that, but I'm now remembering particularly my Arsenal supporting mates when Arsenal were bottom of the league, 3 defeats in a row from the first 3 games, including losing to Thomas Frank's Brentford, who'd just been promoted. Do you remember they lost 2-0? And in fact, Frank referenced this the other day when I asked him about set pieces and where his sort of fascination came from. And he cited his under-12 team and under-19 team, and then also Brentford in particular, and how I think it was a long throw in that game. And it all came from Rasmus Ankersen, who was the co-director of football there, who was a big proponent of long throws and was buzzing for that goal against Arsenal. But anyway, the point being is after they lost those first 3 games, which also included, if you might remember, I think a 5-0 defeat at the Etihad for the 3rd game. I mean, a lot of my Arsenal friends were like, Arteta out, which seemed to be kind of the way of fans generally. So it wasn't like, I'm not saying, that's obviously anecdotal. My mate who's very, floats with the wind. But
you've just got some very irrational, angry friends, Tom. That's the bottom line. I mean, if they're Arsenal fans, they've got issues anyway, haven't they?
Happy to relay that to him, and rightly so. You make a good point. But I do think there were others like that too. So yeah, that's just football fans, isn't it? I think winning the FA Cup, from his own perspective, from the club keeping sort of keeping the faith with him, what was big. That was early evidence of tangible success early on. But you got to say, fair play to them, even though they haven't actually won anything since. I think that's quite a reductive argument. Yes, it is about silverware, and that is really, really important. But he's turned them from being, 8th and kind of really struggling, as well as Unai Emery has done at Villa since, to regular challenges, to the point where most of us are thinking they're probably favourites this year, although City are having a bit of a resurgence, aren't they? And yes, he's been massively backed in the transfer market. I mean, just look at the defensive options backup. I mean, Hincapié, I don't know if it's a loan at first, but it's going to be nearly 50 million. Ben White, 50 million. He's now backup right back. I mean, they've got strength and depth financially that I don't think Tottenham have or have had. So there is that to come into it. But there's a real plan. There's a real philosophy that he and the club have followed through on, which looks like it might just about sort of bear fruit this year. So yeah, there's definitely a case to be said that if Spurs do the same thing with Frank, they may get to the same end. But I wonder, throughout that time with Arteta, yeah, he's quite pragmatic. But and there are games where they don't create loads of chances. But are Arsenal boring to watch? I don't know if they're that boring to watch, because that seems to be the main criticism of Frank so far at Tottenham. If we're being honest, is fans saying this is dull at times. So I don't know if there's a complete similarity there between the two of them.
I try to avoid Arsenal games whenever possible. I did watch them at home to Crystal Palace, and I thought they were very boring that day. So yeah, they had the ability. I mean, the bigger picture for me, Tom, and some people might say, "Oh, well, you were one of those screaming at Postecoglou last season," but that was only sort of 18 months in. I just find it extraordinary that, except in unique circumstances, and you could argue that when Ange went to Nottingham Forest, it just wasn't working, and it made sense for everyone to cut the cord after 37 days. But as a general rule, you've got to give a manager, I mean, a minimum of a year with another summer to bring in some more players, 18 months, surely, before you can really judge what the guy is doing, which is why I find it strange that we have got some people, and I know they've been affected by the very disappointing home form this season, but to have people already saying Frank is not the right man, I just find that crazy. I really do. And you look back in time, look at Alex Ferguson all those years ago. Took him how long? 2-3 years to start turning things around. Jurgen Klopp required a little bit of time. Where I know football fans are not generally patient, but you've got to have some patience. Otherwise, you'll be pulling the plug on somebody every 2 months.
Yeah, I mean, I think Arteta is sort of now like the sort of modern Ferguson, isn't he? He kind of gets held up against all the sort of managers who are struggling early on, and you kind of say, well, look at Arteta, Arsenal was struggling, and he was under a lot of pressure. And I think Tom's right. Like, let's not give Arsenal fans too much credit here. We don't want to do that. Like, I think he was under a lot of pressure from supporters, for a long time, and the credit really goes to the board, who to be honest, handed him a new contract at a point when I think there was still big question marks over him, and that was a big statement of faith. I also think the key, and when you mention those examples there, you're absolutely right. People like Klopp, even Guardiola. I mean, early on, his first season was not a success, and Arteta, even though the results in those early kind of months were very up and down and were very wavering. I think it was clear from the outset what they were trying to do. And I think that is the key. Like if you are a manager under pressure early on, even fans, and clearly sort of, executives, they want to see evidence of not just improvement, because sometimes it doesn't improve, but evidence of a plan, of an identity, of some kind of way of playing, and if you can see that and it's not coming off, then you say, okay, maybe with better players, with more coaching, with more time, this is going to go somewhere. I think the problem comes, and someone like Nuno is a good example of this, when you don't see a plan, and Potter, for example, at Chelsea was a bit like, what are they doing? What are they actually trying to do here? And sometimes you can watch a game of football and you can think, yeah, they made mistakes, it didn't come off, but actually I can really see what's happening. I think that was really the case with Klopp at Liverpool. I think it was really the case with Arteta as well at Arsenal. He didn't have the players for a long time that were kind of there for him that he wanted, and it took a long time to clear those players out. And when we talk about time, that is often the thing. It's often about moving out the sort of dead wood and moving in the players that you want. And that's where recruitment is absolutely crucial, obviously. But I think that's what Frank has to do here. In these early months when there's a bit of sort of turbulence, I don't think he needs brilliant results. He just needs to have a clear identity and a clear plan. And clearly for Spurs and for fans to kind of get behind that plan. And I think we talked about this on the previous pod, didn't we? That there needs to be a little bit of adrenaline there as well. There needs to be a bit of a thrill factor. But I mean, I think the Frank Arteta one comparison is interesting. Equally, they sort of come from a very different career trajectory, don't they? Like Arteta was sort of thrown in to a big club with big sort of suspicions and question marks about whether he was ready. And similarly, Frank has the same thing. People are questioning, is he a big club manager? But with very different career paths. Frank has sort of done it with Brentford, done the best job you can possibly do, basically, with a lower Premier League team. Whereas Arteta's sort of education was, spend a couple of years as an assistant under Pep Guardiola, and ultimately they've sort of ended up in the same place where the fans aren't quite sure because they don't have the sort of CV of a Conte or a Mourinho, for example. But actually, they've come from very different places, and that's interesting to me. When you think about the managers, you get the big club jobs now. Think about like Kompany, for example, at Bayern Munich. You think about, Xavi Hernandez, Zidane, even Xabi Alonso, bit of a mix there. But they all have big CVs as players and big names. Whereas someone like Frank is not a big name, but he's kind of like got sort of very impressive CV of kind of climbing and scaling up, But ultimately, they ended up in the same place where in the first few months, they had to deal with a lot of lack of faith from fans because probably they haven't done it before at a big club.
Yeah, it's a really interesting little comparison. And I think one thing is clear. We all know that Thomas Frank needs some better players, particularly in a forward position. And one name that's cropped up again, because I understand that I know that details of his release clause have been made public and Spurs have long been linked with him. And when he played at Tottenham earlier this season, I thought he was outstanding. I'm talking about Semenyo at Bournemouth. And I think, potentially he's available for £65 million in the January transfer window. And Tom, you were saying that figure actually might come down in the summer, but already a lot of other teams are being linked. How good is Semenyo? Is he the sort of player that Spurs now need to go out and get just to kickstart that attacking thrill factor that we've been talking about and that we've been so sorely lacking in the first 4 months of the season?
Yeah, I mean, we should credit as well here. I think it was David Ornstein who possibly broke this story first. I'm sorry, over the international break, I wasn't massively on top of whose story this was first. We did in the Times. I think Pete Rutzler did it. The idea Semenyo has this release clause in his contract, 65 billion for a specific window, I think in early January, so that Bournemouth then, if he does go, will have time for the rest of the window to get in a replacement. Seems like a very sensible clause, I have to say. And clearly, when you think about why did he sign a new contract last summer, this sort of explains a bit more now why he kind of penned that new deal, even though there was a lot of interest in him. I think the story is that next summer that figure will then come down even further. And when you think about the fees right now that are going for these kind of attacking players, even 65 million is relatively modest. I mean, Kudus was 55, I think, or 50 odd, and that was, I think, quite modest as well. These sort of players now proven in the Premier League over 2 or 3 years, who can score, who can assist, who can beat people, who are a good age in terms of their age profile. They're going for 70, 80 million upwards, so this fee will be very attractive, I think, to all the big six Premier League teams. If the question is, would Spurs be a good fit for Semenyo? I think absolutely. I think it's exactly what they need right now. Someone who can stretch defenses, run in behind, can finish, can beat players, can press. I mean, he's a fantastic player. I mean, let's make no bones about it. The first few months of the season, I think he's probably been the most dangerous forward in the division. Whether he can keep that going across the league, let's see. I think Tottenham's problem will be that they will have competition, next year. And maybe it'll be one of those where Semenyo will have to weigh up, do I want to go to a club where I can perhaps have a better chance of winning trophies? Or do I want to go somewhere I know I'm going to play every single week? And that will perhaps be what Spurs could offer. But would he be a good addition to the Tottenham squad right now, in my opinion? Absolutely.
Yeah, and by all accounts, a great character as well. Tom's talked about his quality, which is there for everyone to see, and how fitting he'd be for that left wing position for Tottenham. But I mentioned on another pod, I went down to interview Alex Scott. Didn't get his cap for England, but got hauled up recently, and they're very close. Alex was telling me how much Tottenham fan, by the way, Alex Scott. How close the two of those are in the squad, and how much he was sort of texting Antoine throughout the summer when there was talk of Tottenham, talk of Man United and other clubs, desperately hoping he'd stay, and obviously really happy that he did. They go for coffee quite a lot. I think there's a very tight squad that Bournemouth team. There's a lot of mates in amongst each other, but also obviously Bournemouth are a selling club. We've seen that, in recent years with, or just this summer with all half the defence moving off to massive clubs, and it does feel like Semenyo is going to be the next cab off the rank. But everyone down there speaks so glowingly, not only of, like I say, his quality, but as a character. So he'd be a really good addition in that sense. And what a statement it would be for this so-called new era of Tottenham under effectively the same ownership, but we're led to believe it's a new era, to be able to go and get someone like that. It would cost a lot in wages because of the competition and other teams, but that's where Spurs at times, that's been one of the biggest criticisms, even though Daniel Levy presumably would see it differently and see it as really sort of very a cautious, shrewd way of running the club in terms of the wage to turnover ratio. But I think really to compete, they do need to at least the big bucks on some players, and I think Semenyo would be perfect. And just finally on him, talking about his quality, I remember watching a video a couple of weeks ago with Callum Hudson-Odoi, or another previous Tottenham target. I think it was just on Instagram, but he was asked to name the best three players in the world right now. He mentioned Yamal, he mentioned Dembele, and he mentioned Antoine Semenyo. I think he actually mentioned Semenyo first. So if that's anything to go on, he's clearly really rated amongst his fellow pros, and that is always a really good indication of how good a player is.
Yeah. Well, in the old days, when I was young, I'd write to Dear Santa at this time of the year, telling him what I wanted. But now it's Dear Viv, as we like to call her on the programme, one of the ruling forces in the Lewis family. Dear Viv, go out and make that impact signing and bring Semenyo to Tottenham on New Year's Day. Well, we can but dream. Now, if George was here, he'd be straight up for his prediction, and he's fantastic with them. But boys, come on. Final question. What is going to happen on Sunday? We've had some positives from you, Tommy. We've had some negatives. Does that all lead to a draw? What do you reckon?
Tottenham are going to win 1-0.
Come on, do you really mean that?
I'm not sure, but I'm going for it. 1-0 Tottenham. I think it's a cagey game. They'll nick it. Best away team in the league.
I like it. Tom B, the pressure's on you now not to be the early season Scrooge.
I mean, these are so ridiculous because we're on a Tottenham podcast. How can I possibly go for Arsenal or any game? Can I go against them? It's just going to go down like an absolute lead balloon. But then, what do I go? I seem to go for draws every week because I clearly don't think Tottenham are going to quite win. And I think Arsenal are going to win this game. I don't see, even with all their injuries, I just think that Spurs haven't beaten them for a while, since I think it was that Conte 3-0, which was such a massive game in Arteta's tenure as well. That's probably one of the matches that we should have talked about a bit in terms of the patience that was shown around Arteta, because I imagine from the fans' perspective, because that basically kiboshed their chance of the Champions League that year, then it would have gone into overdrive, the Arteta out. But Arsenal stuck with him, and it's paid off so far. But I don't know, the Arsenal just look like pretty just imperious right now. I know Sunderland got a draw, but it was last minute, wasn't it? Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to go 2-1 Arsenal, and hope the whole listeners don't and viewers don't hate me for it.
What's the overriding feeling, Marcus, going into the game? Is it sort of trepidation? Is it apprehension? Are you sort of feel like it's a free hit? What's the overriding vibe?
I think, unfortunately, I don't have the expectation that we started to build, under Poch and for a period of time after that. So I'm preparing myself for a defeat, and I think, Tom B, that Spurs fans, our listeners and viewers, will appreciate your candour and accept that is the likely outcome. However, as Tom A's gone for a Spurs win and you've gone for an Arsenal win, I'm going to go with a draw. And funnily enough, it's something you just said a bit earlier about an old Brentford Arsenal game. And I'm suddenly seeing visions of Kevin Danso, who's come on as a substitute late in the game. A long throw into the box. There's a little bit of confusion. Arsenal are missing Gabriel. And Xavi is going to score and get us a point. We've covered ourselves, guys. One of us has got to be right in terms of the result, at least.
Yeah. We need George here. He's the one who usually gets it right, to be fair.
We do. Yeah. Well, listen, we'll find out on Sunday. Guys, thank you so much. That's I think that we've nothing else you want to say before we gird our loins? No. So thank you. Thank you very much to Tom Allnutt of the Times. 1-0 to Spurs. The villain, the traitor, Tom Barclay, 2-1 to Arsenal. And Marcus Buckland, I'm saying it's 1-1. Most importantly, come on, you Spurs.